Welcome back to Schmattz Outdoors, everyone. Today we're making some muskrat floats. There's a lot of opinions one way and the other on whether they work or not, when they work, that type of stuff. We're going to find out on my own. There's so much conflicting information out there. One person will say they don't work in the fall at all. The next person says they do just fine on them in the fall. Some people say they really work in the spring. I can't trap in the spring. My season ends well before open ice here in Minnesota, so can't trap them in the spring. So we're gonna try running some muskrat floats this fall. I kind of built my own design again, like I always do. Not for any other reason than I just did not like the designs out there for one reason. When I watch videos of people running floats, I see a lot of traps that are just knocked off but still set, which tells me that something most likely tried to climb onto their float but then hooked their trap with their foot and just drug it off, were up on their float and then knocked it off without setting it off. Having a trap knocked off your float and set off is a little bit different. That means you might have had one caught, but only had him, toe caught or tail caught or something like that, and he was able to pull himself out and got loose. You never really know. That might have been a miss, where one just knocked it off, or it might have been an actual catch where it got pulled out. I am trying to eliminate the knocked off traps, period, without a catch in there. So I'm doing, my setup is a little bit different, like I said, than most here, and we're going to kind of show you what I got going on, why I kind of landed on what I did here. I've made 2 prototypes here, and I think the second one's going to be more what my design's going to be, and we're going to build a dozen of them like this. Yeah, we're going to build a dozen like this, and I'm hoping to maybe do another dozen with a little bit different design for a different style trap. But that's going to be its own separate video. We're going to go over the floats I'm making now. If I do decide, or if I have time, I guess, is more how it's going to be to build the second set of floats. We'll show you why, or what those are and why I'm building those the way I am. Yeah, so just a little bit more on using floats in the fall. I know some guys say they don't like them. I designed and built a floating colony trap a few years ago. Last year, luckily, I didn't put it out in the ice, but the year before I put it out, and I had muskrats actually setting on it and pooping on my floating colony trap, but just wouldn't go into the colony trap for some reason and get caught in there, because I never did catch one in it. But there was poop on the board that's at water level, and there was poop up on top of the cage, so they climbed up on top of the 6-inch wire mesh and pooped on top of there, which tells me that they'll climb on things in the fall. And that's what kind of led me to building some floats and trying them out this fall. So yeah, like I said, there's lots of people who say they don't work in the fall. I kind of wonder if it isn't a little bit of a per situation thing like everything else. One guy might be able to use floats and they'll set on it. If you have a lot of floating debris or something around, logs and other things floating in some of the sloughs or lakes or whatever, the muskrats are probably used to climbing up on things, and their floats would probably work pretty well. I don't know that I have that necessarily, but like I said, I do have sign that the muskrats are climbing up on things. Do I think they're going to be my top producer over like a baited foothold or a baited 110 with a carrot on the trigger? No, I do not expect that. I would assume it might be half. But here's the thing that these might differ from, in my head, why they differ from those types of sets. Those are pure baited sets. Floats, I actually am going to try, and I'm going to put about half out baited, and I'm going to put the other half out as just a float with no bait on there. I might pile a little bit of seaweed on there or something like that, just to, you know, blend it in or give them something, you know, make it like a feed bed type of situation. But run them without lure and without bait, and then I'm going to run some with bait and lure on them. So they will be a baited type set. The only thing with a float that I'm a little bit concerned about is if you do catch one on one end of your float, if another muskrat comes along and climbs up on the same end of your float, he can get up there and get at your bait without necessarily going over the top of a trap. But hopefully he does that one time, and the next day when you come back, reset your float, and he tries to do it again, bingo, you have him. So I'm okay with sacrificing a little bit of bait. Basically setting up a bait station. If they're used to coming there and getting food, you put a trap there, they're not going to think twice about trying to climb over the trap, and hopefully bingo bango, they're have a chain bracelet holding them down under the water. So all right, I think that's kind of it for the theory on why I'm making floats, what I'm going to use, or how I'm going to use them. We'll get right into the design. So I got 2 floats built. This was my first prototype. We'll set him on top here. So this guy is 16 inches long. He is 7 1/4 wide inside. And the reason why it's 7 1/4, that's how wide a 2x8 is. It's about 7 1/4 or maybe just a touch more. And then I got sides on it, a 2x2 running across it, and then I got a couple short pieces of 2x4 for extra flotation. So here's the issue that I found when I was building these. Without those extra 2x4s under there, this guy sat, water level was only maybe 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 inch below the top here, and I did not want it setting that deep in the water. I wanted it a little more buoyant. I was hoping to get roughly half of my board sticking out of the water, you know, half of my 2x, so 3/4 of an inch roughly out of the water. So if you do make a catch and he's weighting it down, the other side is not underneath the water as well, you know, to try and keep the top surface of this above the water. We'll get into all this in a little more detail, but then I got a 1/2 inch hole. I'm actually going to open that up to a 5/8 hole. All right, and now the important design features, you can see this section right in here. What I did is I actually routed that out to fit a 1.5 coil spring. Let's see, so let's go over the difference here too before we get into that detail, because again, that's the main design feature of this that's different than any other float I've seen. This one here is 20 inches long. So this guy ends up being, the thing I didn't realize is once I routed in my traps there, we'll set a trap on there so you guys can see how it sets in there. But I didn't end up, basically I only have 1 inch or maybe 1.25 inches between the jaw of my trap and my center divider, and I end up with about the same here. If I wanted to put seaweed or something like that on there, basically my trap is setting right on top of, or the seaweed would be basically right on top of the edge of my trap. So I wanted to increase that distance a little more. So I decided I went with a 20-inch design, and you can see that gives me quite a bit more room. I mean, obviously going to give me roughly 2 inches each side. So we'll put this guy back on here. Okay, so now a guy can put a good glob of seaweed there, and my trap is still got a little bit of room between the two of them. The only thing that I have thought of that this one might benefit from that this one won't. This one here would be a good, like, to put a little seaweed on there, which I may do on all of them, honestly. If I can find a little bit of, you know, chewed up cattails or even, like, you know, actual weed out of the sloughs, I'm going to pile some on every one of them, whether I bait them or not. This one, if I just end up running a bait clip above my float, the nice thing is once they're on there, essentially if they're standing there trying to get your bait, okay, there it is. So if they're standing right here to get your bait up here, they're basically dancing around right here on top of your trap because they're going to be setting like this, setting on their back legs. Well, hopefully their back legs are right here in the middle, and blink, and off they go into the water. So that's one benefit of having the little bit shorter one. That one does float a little bit higher than this one. There's obviously a little more wood in here, and it doesn't float quite as high as this one does. All right. So again, the nice thing about what I did here is I have a little more room, so if a guy wants to pile a little bit of seaweed on there, you know, you put seaweed on there, a decent clump, I'm still 1.5 inches from the edge of that. So if they try to climb up on there, you know, there should be basically setting here to chew on the seaweed or to even get up to my bait. All right. One thing you'll notice is my trap is setting, it's just about hitting the side here, and it's just about hitting the side there. It's kind of hard to see with the shadow, but there is a gap there. And that one too, so it's just about hitting on each end. This one here must be, the trap itself must be just a touch shorter, but what I wanted to do is I wanted to try and block this off, keep it as narrow as I possibly could, and keeping the animal coming over with my trap, coming over the pan. You know, I don't really want, like right there, you're 1 inch to the jaw and 1 inch to the pan. That's 2 inches. I don't know that a muskrat is going to try to weasel within that 2 inches without hitting that pan. And the same thing's true on this side. So I feel like if the muskrat comes on the end here at all, he should be hitting that pan. And if he doesn't, he ain't going to be up here very long before he does. All right. So that's the theory behind why I have it setting the way I do. The reason why I got it recessed down, I routed in a groove all the way that fits essentially the whole frame. So it goes, let's see, get this on something so you can see. So basically it goes around the frame, around this part of the frame, around the springs and the dog, and around here. That's what this profile does. So the spring set right in here. The frame sets here and here, and out here is where the dog is, and then this point is kind of where this part of your trap sets, and then you got your spring pins stick out there. So you could kind of see like there where the spring pins, let's see, get it actually in there, there you go. Where the spring pins sit down in there, so I actually had to route her out around where those spring pins set. Trying to get so you guys can see that. There you go. You know, so I don't have a lot of clearance there, but you don't need a lot. One thing I didn't want to is I didn't want a lot of movement in my trap, so I played around quite a bit. I plan on making a bunch of these, and that routering takes a while. What I did is I made a template out of a 3/4 inch thick board, and then my router over here has a follower bit, so it's got a bearing right up here, and then this is what's doing the cutting. So the bearing rides around on my jig. I ended up kind of mouse earing the corners because I need the corners actually routed pretty much square in there, because like your frame here is actually square. So like over here, I need this to be square. I can't have that have a round in the corner of it, or your frame won't set down in there. So, okay. So what I did is I measured this guy. I kind of sketched around the bottom of it the best I could. Then I did some measuring and kind of squared it all off. I'm not going to actually give you guys all the measurements because it would take me half a day to actually measure each one and give you the measurements. But yeah, essentially this is roughly 1 inch. This is about 2.5 or so, but again, it's just so it's wider than my spring pins and the springs on your trap. Yeah, and then over here I have for the dog. I made it plenty of room on that end. I wouldn't have needed to go back quite as far as I did, but I wanted to make sure that the dog can flip off without it like binding on the edge of my router section there. All right. I don't think I really explained this very well why I did this. So I routed my trap down in there so it's setting on the actual spring levers and basically setting on this jaw. The reason why I like this trap cannot come off of there unless it's set off. And I'll show you kind of what I'm talking about. If a muskrat tries to climb up there and he grabs the edge of this, your trap can tip a little like that, but I'm pulling pretty stinking hard there. And my trap is bound up right in here, and the frame is binding in here. And that's not allowing, I'm going to probably pull my jaw out of my trap there before I ever pull that trap off of there. One thing I want you to know, this is not a live trap. I wired the dog down, so it's holding down that jaw. Even though the pan is set off, the dog is holding the jaw down. That one's wired up as well. I did that 100% so I could actually build these, test these. Once I'm done testing it, obviously I'll cut the wires off. But these are not live traps, so if you're worried about me getting caught. But yeah, I can grab this guy and I can pull as hard as I want. So to me, this is actually giving the muskrat leverage to get up onto your float. So if he's grabbing here, chances are once he pulls himself up, bing, he's going to grab this. Next thing you know, when he tries to move, he's going to put his feet right on that, and bingo. As soon as your trap goes off, they're going to be heavy, and this thing's going to jump anyway. I'm not worried at all about them popping this thing off of there. So I have a normal trap. Okay, let's see here. Okay. So once that thing's set off, it's going to be setting roughly like that. I don't think a muskrat's going to have any trouble pulling that off once he's caught. As soon as he's caught, he's going to pull, and the weight of the muskrat and everything is going to pull him off the side. So what I did too is I routed over here for the chain. You can see the chain comes out of the end. This is a Duke 1.5. The chains all come out the same side. I verified that. Every trap I'm going to put on here, the chains are always going to come out this corner. So if anything, this kind of gives them leverage to pull up on there as well. I have a Higgs bracket on there. And what I did is I routed just a little bit to recess that down in there. And then I screwed it down. So I didn't want to screw into the end grain because the end grain is going to swell if it gets wet. And they may actually be able to pull your screw out of the end grain. But by screwing into the top, you're screwing sideways through the grain. They basically got to like pull a whole chunk of wood out of the end of your board to get that off of there. So these traps, once I get the floats built, the traps are going to stay on the floats all the time. I'm not going to take them off every season or anything like that. Unless I want to dye them or do something like that to them, then I can pop them off just by undoing the screw. But I wanted this recessed down a little bit, again, just to make sure that my trap's not going to catch on it. When they're trying to come off of there, I didn't want it like sliding and be able to hook it all on that guy. So this is all, even the screw head is roughly below the top of the wood there. So I'm routed in 3/16 of an inch. All I did is I just took my Higgs bracket, kind of pushed it up there, centered onto the board, drew around it with a pencil. This one got a little off center just to where the screw went in, but drew around it with a pencil, and then I just freehanded the router just to kind of router enough space to get that guy in there. Alright, so I hope I explained that well enough. One last router thing. This part of your trap, I don't even know what it's called. I call it the foot, but I'm not even sure what that is. The edge of your frame there sticks down a little bit below everything else. So what I do is I just went and I routed that down about another. This one's about 1/4 inch. This one I went more like 1/8 of an inch. It doesn't let my trap tip quite as much as this one does. So I'll be going roughly 1/8 of an inch on all the rest of them. And that trap, like I said, that trap is rock solid in there. It barely wiggles around. I mean, it wiggles side to side a little bit, but it doesn't wiggle this way at all. So yeah, a little bit deeper right here. I'm router out the side for my chain to come out the side. On the sides, what I did is this is a 1 inch board cut down to 2 1/4 inches high. I don't want it any taller than I want because the extra weight just makes your float sink or set that much lower. Again, a 2 by 2 in the middle. I feel like that's enough. This is a high enough thing that it's gonna hopefully stop them from wanting to climb over that when they can come around on the end and get up real easy on the end. Because you gotta remember, if this thing is floating this far in the water, them jumping up onto that's going to be tough to get over 1.5 inches or more above the water, as opposed to on the end when it's basically water level, they can climb right on. And I'm giving them nice leverage to pull themselves up there with the jaw of my trap, so they can hook that. But what I did is I clipped these off. It's roughly a 30-degree angle. I just wanted to make sure I left this edge above the side of my board. I didn't want to cut it way down here. My idea is that, like, if they get caught and they try to jump off, the chain is going to naturally want to, I don't want them hung up like that, let's put it that way. So the idea is, once you get about that far, it's going to naturally want to, like, slide them off the end. My chain is twisted up. Here we go. We'll try that. So yeah, the idea is that, like, that chain is going to want to try and slide off the end. I could have left that probably a square corner. I just didn't want to take the chance that they get hung up like this over the side on the end of my board. I'm hoping that they're going to slide. This is going to help them slide off the end. So as soon as the animal's caught, trap falls off, they're hanging down here, and they should be waiting for you right there when you get back. I researched a few different options on how to stake or hold down your float. Or not hold it down, but stake it or hold it in place. I was thinking anchors, but I don't really have, I figure a guy's gonna need probably like a 2.5 pound anchor or something like that. Some of these bigger sloughs, you'll get 2-foot rollers coming across that slough. Well, I don't want my float floating across the slough because I don't take my boat with me when I'm water trapping. I'm just doing it all from shore. So I want to make sure my floats stay where they're supposed to be. So you could run an anchor on them. I don't know how long a rope to put on there is part of what I don't know, because one slough might be 2 feet deep, the next one might be 6 feet deep. So do you put a 6-foot rope, and then in a 2-foot slough your float can just circle around, make a 10-foot circle in there? I don't really want that either, because I just think it's just going to end up getting caught up in the cattails. So my second choice, and might still be an option, we'll just see how these work this first season, is what I was going to do is I was going to run a fence staple in the side of this and run a rope about 2 foot is what I was thinking, and then do a fence post, like a gray fence post. That way your float could still bob up and down, the rope would let it float, act normal, and it would just swing around your pole there. If you did a 2-foot rope, it'd be able to make a 4-foot circle, but it would pretty much keep it in place, but give it the freedom to move up and down. The option that I decided on, from some of the comments that I've gotten from people and the research I've done, is I'm going to run a pole directly down through the middle of my float. I was going to use 3/8 fence posts. What I decided, I actually bought some 6-foot tall, 1/2 inch diameter fence posts. So that's why I'm going to open the hole up to 5/8. One thing that the fence post does, if you run a fence post through here, that keeps your float from doing weird things like this. Like if you get a muskrat on one end and your float wants to go like that from the weight of the muskrat, your pole is going to basically keep your float. It might let it tip a little like this, but it's not going to let it tip way up to the side. So that's what the hole is in there. Again, that's going to be, I'm using 1/2 inch fence posts to hold them in place, only because I was worried about like the weight of this and you get waves pushing on it. And with a 3/8 fence post, I was afraid, especially if you get like 6 foot, if your float's 5 foot high on a 6-foot fence post, is your fence post going to just do this and you get a big enough wave, could it push it off the top? So with a 1/2-inch fence post, they're a little bit more rigid, and I think there's a little less chance that they knocks them off, or that your float can get off, I guess would be a better way to put that. So this one here, like I said, is the second prototype. I didn't bring my 5-inch drill bait out yet, but I will. It's going to be right in the middle, side to side, and in the middle of my 2x2 here. When I screwed this on, I made sure right here my screws, they actually popped through just a little, and I sanded them off. All I'm using is decking screws to hold this all together. To hold the 2x2 on, I got 3-inch decking screws running through the bottom into this. To hold the 2x4s underneath the sides here, so holding that 2x4 on, there's a decking screw right here and one over here. Same thing on this end. To hold my sides on, I'm using 3 shorter screws, or like 1.5 inches long. I'm pre-drilling these holes. So I got like a countersunk pre-drill tool there, because these are just pallet boards trimmed off of, you know, some old pallets, scrap pallets. They're dry pine boards, and I think if you didn't pre-drill them, I think you're going to split every one of them. So I pre-drilled the hole just basically through this, and then run those screws. So this is into, you know, the main board, so is this one, and then this one here is into that 2x, just to give it a little bit of support this direction, you know, so it doesn't want to like peel off of the side. All right, for actual boards, let's go over a little bit what the boards are. The main base of my board here is a 20-inch long piece of a 2x8. They're about 7¼ inches wide, and again 20 inches long. The divider piece is just a 2x2. You can rip down a 2x4 if you want, do whatever you want. Goes right in the middle, screwed in from the bottom. Since this is 7¼ inches long, I didn't want my extra float material that's on the underside 7¼ inches wide. I wanted it to fit in between here. Okay, so these are 6¾ inches long, the two of them. And again, they're going to be on the underside, screwed on like that. Screwed in from the top, you know, next to where my router is, or routered spots are. My sides are about 2¼ inches tall, and what that's getting me, I want it flush. I basically just lined it up flush with my 2x2 there. So I want it flush, and I got about 3/4 inch lip there. Again, I want to make these as small as I possibly can, because any extra weight you're putting on, especially above the surface of the water, is going to sink your float that much further. So this guy is 17 inches long, 2¼ inches tall, and then I have, it's probably like 1¼ inch by 3 clip on the corner over here. Yeah, and there's, I think that's about it. So there's 12 screws holding the whole thing together. There's 2 here, 2 there, 2 there are 3-inch deck screws. There's 3 on each side, which are 1.5 inch long screws. And then right here, this is a like a self-tapping, easy for me to say, self-tapping sheet metal screw that's 1 inch long. I just wanted a round-headed screw on there, and that's what I happen to have. All these boards except for this 2x8 were all scrap boards. I mean, you can see I got a whole pile of them I found around our farm here. The 2x4s, like that one's all cut up. It's going to get cut up into extra float material. There's some more cruddy 2x4s right over here. So again, basically I had to buy 2x8s. What I did is I bought a 10-foot 2x8, and out of a 10-foot board, you can actually get 6 floats. So 10 foot is 120 inches, 20 inches a piece. You can get 6 out of each one. I got 2 already built. I got this one, and right over here, my extra, the rest of a dozen. So I cut up 2 2x10s, and I'm going to make exactly a dozen floats here. So what I did is I cut enough pieces just to show you what all the pieces are. What I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to router all the pockets for all the traps and all these boards first. Then we're going to go and we're going to cut all the pieces for every one of them. I got my saw set up over here. We're just going to go and just 6 3/4. I'll actually set up a stop on there and I can just buzz them off. You know, I need, well, let's see, I needed 24 and I got 6 made. So I need 18 more of them. I need 9 more, I believe, of the 2x2. And then, yeah, I need 20 sides, 18 sides, because I got 2 built right here. So, yeah, I'll just set up, and when I'm making sides, I'll just make sides. For the side pieces, what I have are just some 2x6s, some scrap 2x6s. And what I did is I got 2 pieces out of one board, 2 sides out of one board. So I cut it to length first. So like if I push these down tight to the end. So I'll cut it to length first. And then I just cut one side off, cut the other side off, and then do the 2 clips. So nice thing is out of a 1x6, I can get 2 sides out of a 17-inch long piece of it. And again, these were all scrap boards anyway, so it worked out pretty well for me. To use up some of the boards I had. Originally, this design, I had a higher side on there, but what I figured out is the higher the sides you make it, the more it pushes your float down into the water. So I sacrificed the height in order to get my overall float to float a little bit higher. So we're going to go over my jig just a little bit because I don't think I explained what I got very well here. What I did again is this is actually a 1x8. It's a little bit wider than a 2x8 is. So basically I'm just locating it centered on there, locating it flush with the end. What I did is I just got 4 sheetrock screws to hold it down in place. So I routed this whole thing. What I'm routering it, I'm cutting it 3/4 of an inch deep for the main pocket. What I do is I actually cut a 3/8 deep the first pass, and then I went all the way the full depth and then cut all the way around. And what I found is if I actually cut the profile, go all the way around first, and then you can kind of clean up the middle, and then it doesn't want to like chip out the corners and stuff. Let's see. Like this one here, it chipped the corner off on there because I tried to cut it all in one pass and it just didn't work right. It didn't work that good. It's also hard on your router cutting 3/4 of an inch deep all at one pass. So you just got to cut real slow. When you're only cutting 3/8, it seems like I can cut pretty quickly through there and it didn't take me long at all. Okay, so 3/4 inch deep, I follow the profile first, and then once I get the whole outside done, then I just go around and kind of just make passes and clean up everything inside. Now that I have this side routed, you can see this side here isn't. I basically just take my pattern off and I just rotate it around onto this end, screw it back on, and then router the same thing. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to router the main pocket and all of them that I have left. I got 8 there, the one on the bottom that I showed you, this one, and this one. So I got 9.5 more to do. Then I'm going to adjust my router an 1/8 inch deeper just to do the little pockets in the corner. And I can just touch in there, go did it, and touch on this side, do it. Do that to all of them. And then I'll go and I'll actually mark the spot for the Hagues bracket to go in there, and then I'll do all these all at the same time. So that way I can set, like right now I have my router, that's the full depth that I'm cutting to get to this depth, which is actually about 1.5 inches deep because you got a 3/4 inch board and I'm cutting 3/4 inch deep. So my router bit's sticking out about 1.5 inches right now. So now I got it fixed at that depth so I could cut this. So like I said, we'll router all the main pockets and all of them. Yeah, if you guys watch my channel at all, you know I'm a jig and fixture guy. You could freehand each one, but it's going to look pretty darn cruddy, I think, by the time you're done. And you're going to have to keep cleaning them up until you can get your trap to set down in there. I did not want to be doing that. So I made a jig and I made sure that my Duke traps are going to set in there every time. This is going to save me a ton of time, like I said, because I can router that whole profile and have the shape and router it out. It takes me, well, under 5 minutes for each end, and I have the pocket routered in there. So if I was doing that freehand, I think you would have to do like some sketching with a pencil first, and then router it, and then test your trap. I think you're going to spend 10 or more minutes on each end just to get a trap to set down in there right. So, all right, guys. I'm not going to make you guys watch me router or anything like that. One thing I'm doing when I'm routering is I got my shop vac. This particular attachment on my router I can't hook the shop vac to, but I'm basically just laying that as close as I can get it to the back side of my router when I'm routering. It's been doing a pretty good job catching the dust. Wear ear and eye protection. I got mine right here. Here's my eye protection, my ear protection. So with the router running and the shop vac running, it's loud in here. My hearing's not the greatest to begin with, so wear ear protection when you're doing this stuff, and wear eye protection because routers throw chips everywhere. Even with glasses on, I already had a piece go in. It didn't get in my eye, but it went over my glasses and in between my eye and the glasses. So you gotta watch that. Make sure your glasses are pushed tight to your face. A face shield might be better, but I don't have a face shield or actual goggles of some sort. Yeah, like I said, I'm not going to make you guys watch me router and saw and all that stuff. I think you guys get the idea of, you know, how a saw works, how the router works. I'm using a skill saw to rip these down. A table saw would be better, but I don't have a good one to use. The one I do have is buried under a bunch of stuff. It'd take me longer to get it out, and so I could use it than it would be just to run a skill saw for these. And they're not that critical. Basically, I just need it the rough size so I can mount it onto the side of my float. So I think I've went over pretty much everything. Like I said, we're going to give these a shot this fall. We'll be probably putting, they'll be in my out on the line videos for sure, because I'm going to make some catches on them. I just don't know how many. That's the thing. Is it going to be one catch on all of them for the whole season? I'd be pretty darn bummed if I'm going through all this work and only catch one muskrat. If that's the way it is, you know, some of the guys that say you can't catch muskrats on floats in the fall are right. I don't think they are. I think they're a nice change-up tool from a baited set. You know, if you snap the muskrat in a pure baited set, like a foothold, you know, a Haig's bracket on a pole with a bait clip above it, or a 110 with a carrot on it like I run. If you've snapped one in a trap like that, this might be a place where you might still be able to catch that muskrat. You might be a little less wary of a true baited set than he would be an actual float like this. So we're going to scatter them around out on my trap line. I trap plenty of sloughs. We're basically going to probably dump one in a slough and move on to the next one, dump another one out, depending on the size of the slough. And to me, if a road cuts a slough in half, it's a separate slough on each side of the road. So in some places, I might actually dump one on each side of the road, do a baited set on one side, and just do a float with maybe a little weeds on it on the other side. That's about as fair as a comparison as you can get, in my opinion, if it's the same slough just cut in half. So, you know, the rats there on one side of the road should be basically the same rats that are on the other side of the road, because they'll go back and forth. So, all right, I think that's all I got for you. Again, I'm not going to make you sit here and watch me actually assemble this or anything. There's really not a whole lot to it. I'm basically, this is centered. My bottom, I went roughly an inch, and I didn't even measure. I just eyeballed back an inch roughly from the end because I wanted to make sure I had room for my Haig's bracket. Oh, one last thing. So I mentioned that my get the traps off, that my bottom extra float boards, they're 6 3/4 inch long. My floats are 7 1/4 wide, so this will set down in there. So once I pick up all my floats, one float will set into the other one. So essentially that 2x right there is setting down on this face in there, and I should be able to stack the whole series of them up. And you can see how my trap is just hanging off the end. Obviously this one's a little shorter float. Well, here, if we bump it up like that. You know, if I have this one screwed onto there, all my traps will just hang off the end of this side and then off of the end on this side. And like I said, I should be able to stack all my floats one on top of the other for storage. Should be pretty handy. You know, I didn't want them like having to have a huge pile or just thrown together because they won't, you know, won't stack nicely, or if you do stack them, the stack will tip over. This should be pretty darn square because you got, you know, you're setting on 2x4s on the bottom, each one setting on 2x4s onto the next one and so on. So should be pretty darn steady that way. And I just wanted them a little bit narrower so when I go to stack them up, they're going to actually stack nice. All right, I think that's the last thing I got. If I find out or think of anything else here, I'll turn you guys back on and show you as I'm building them here. Otherwise, I appreciate you guys watching Schmattz Outdoors. We'll see you guys on the next one. All right, one thing that I forgot to mention in the last clip. I did test this guy out. I had the two traps, these two traps here actually. I screwed them onto this one for the video for you guys. I had these two traps setting on top of here, screwed in. You can see where there's a screw hole there. I had it basically setting how it would be set in a slough for 9 days because I was worried about them getting waterlogged. So it starts off roughly half of the board sticking out, maybe a little less than that. After 9 days, the water level was about at the actual top of my board. So it was dry on the top, but just barely. Like if I just bumped it and the water run over the top of it. So after 9 days in the water, it was still floating above the water. The little bit bigger size, the 20-inch one here. This guy doesn't set. I tested him out in the water, in the sock tank as well. And it doesn't set quite as high, but I'm hoping with a little more wood here that it will keep itself a little more buoyant for longer than that one does. But I don't know. I imagine like how the end grain looks and stuff on there is going to have something to do with how the water absorbs into them. This season I'm going to run them just bare wood, get them weathered. Like, you know, that one looks weathered because again it was in the stock tank for 9 days. We're going to get them weathered in. If I think they need it before next season, what I'll do is after the season I'll just set them out and I'll let them air dry essentially, you know, for 6 months probably over the winter and into the spring. What I may end up doing is I may just buy some like some sealer paint of some sort, probably tan color or something. I don't know what color it'd be, but actually paint them and make sure you really get like the end grains of the boards, because the end grain will just keep soaking up the paint. But the more it soaks up, the less water it's going to want to soak up once you stick them in there, and that might reduce the amount that it takes on water and wants to sink during the season. Again, in my area here, if I get 7 days of water trapping, I'm going to be lucky. So usually some years I don't even get that much. Some years I get more. If I get 7 days to 9 days out of these floats before I have to pull them, I'd be plenty good with that. And honestly, it was still floating. It just wasn't floating as high as I'd like to. So I still think the muskrats might climb on it. It'd just be easier for them to get up there. So if I'm still making catches with them, even if they start sinking, I'm going to leave them out. So all right, that's all I got for you guys. I just wanted to point that out, that I did run a test. Like I said, 9 days, and it was still basically right at the top of this water level. So I think it would have still been working just fine, still probably catching muskrats. So, all right. Now that's all I have for you guys. We'll see you guys on the next one.